Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about our friend, the Nintendo Switch, and specifically its 8th birthday. Yes, 8 years. Which gets more and more depressing the older you get. Before we do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel, etc. Appreciate the support on all those platforms. Let's get into it. So, purpose of today's video. Yes, if you're watching this the day it came out, it is March 3rd, 2025, which is exactly 8 years since the launch of our friend, the Nintendo Switch. And if you're unfamiliar with my channel or these types of videos, basically what I like to do is kind of recap the last year of any sort of relevant system and kind of project its future. The thing is, we are what I would, if this was an election, I would call this the lame duck session, where the old administration is still in power, the new administration is about to come in, and we all just kind of have to awkwardly sit there and wait for that to happen. So what I mean by that is, the Nintendo Switch at the time this video is released is still Nintendo's dominant system. The Nintendo Switch 2, which is actually what it's called, and I'm sure you all know that, is not yet out. Thus, this one is still their main focus. But to be completely realistic about it, April 2nd, 2025, less than a month from the day you are seeing this, if not, or it hasn't already happened depending on when you chose to watch this, we're going to have way more information on the Nintendo Switch 2, its release date, which could be in April for all we know. Nintendo kind of does weird stuff like that. So there's not a whole lot of time left, is kind of my point, where this thing is Nintendo's dominant console, unless they surprise us and say Nintendo Switch 2 is coming out in like 2027, which would really just be weird. But aside from some crazy announcement that would be unforeseen, yeah, this is kind of the end of the Nintendo Switch 1, which is I guess what we're now going to be retroactively calling it. So that doesn't mean the system won't get supported or anything. We'll talk a little bit about that kind of thing in a minute. But that's where we find ourselves, at an interesting moment in time where this is still technically their system of dominance, but it's just about to end. So, as far as the system itself, within the last year or so, it really didn't do anything that zany. It had a good library of games. It did not launch like some new special edition of the system or anything like that. If you watched my video on this last year, that's kind of what I was projecting, was like they were just kind of what I always say is not rock the boat. Basically, if your system lives this long and is that successful, companies don't typically try to introduce a whole bunch of weird stuff to kind of shake it up unless they become desperate. Nintendo never got desperate because the system was a consistent success, so all they really had to do is continue to make the hardware, make reliable games. That's all they had to do. And to that end, they did exactly that. They just kept pumping out more of the consoles. Granted, it was same versions of the consoles, like the OLED, the Lite, etc. And then they just put out new titles like that Princess Peach game. I already forgot the name of it off the top of my head, but like they did what they were supposed to do. A lot of third-party support, etc. Everybody just, but the thing was, the entire narrative of the year was dominated by when is Switch 2 happening. So the Switch 1 in of itself, it just did what it was supposed to do, which was not a particularly exciting story. It's just how these things go when consoles last that long. So you obviously want to hear more about the Switch 2. Obviously, I have no additional insights. You know, I heard the same announcement you did. The only difference between you and me is that I was on Tinian Island in the Pacific when that happened, which is where at the end of World War II, the atomic bombs, like the planes that took off from that island to go drop them on Japan. That's where I was when that happened. So I even made my announcement video from that strange historic location. But that said, we need to talk about that. The projection of the future and what the Switch 2 means to Switch 1. This video is not supposed to be about the Switch 2 and everything I think it will be. We can only speculate on any of that, but I do think there's only really two possibilities there. Either it'll be the exact success story Nintendo sees it as, and as a result, I want to focus on it within that prism of what it means for Switch 1. If that system is a success, then Switch 1 will probably follow a very traditional model of, okay, now that it's no longer the primary focus, they'll keep servers up for a couple of years. indies can still make games. Nintendo will probably give us like a couple of big releases, probably one, you know, somewhat in tandem with the release of Switch 2. Kind of like how they did Breath of the Wild for the Wii U as a parting gift type of thing. I'm going to guess it's something to that effect. It might even be Mario Kart 9 for all we know. But, you know, I could see that type of thing. That would be the normal route. And then from there, it just whittles down. Like, they don't really give you any games anymore, but third parties do, and then more jump ship, and then eventually you're down to just some indies. And then you get down to that point where it's whoever is the last holdout that just wants to be the company that had the last officially licensed Switch game, because that always happens. And then that boils down to how long Nintendo is willing to produce those carts. In the case of the Wii U and the Wii, the only reason the disc production stopped is not because third parties weren't interested anymore. It was because Nintendo themselves didn't want to do disc production for those games. So that boils down to that, because I guarantee you there will be indies that continue to do it until then. That's the sequence of events I expect the future of the Switch 1 to be. And it may or may not pass the PlayStation 2 in that process. It depends on how much more hardware Nintendo physically constructs, even if it's not new hardware for the Switch 1. But they do have the opportunity to release something a little bit more unique if they wanted to, kind of like the end of the Wii, they released the Wii Mini. There could be some sort of truncated Switch that's even more basic, that's like, I know this is extreme, but getting it out there for like $99 just to squeeze a little bit more money out of the market and push those numbers right before it ends. That might make it feasible, but they haven't shown any real interest in that, and I don't blame them because they're ready to move on, because everybody has been kind of complaining at them for 8 years that their system was anemic. I remember we were complaining about that, including myself, before the system even launched. You know, so it was true back then, so it's much more true now. That's the most likely course of the future. There is, of course, the alternate course where the Switch 2 is somehow a failure. I don't think that's going to happen. And the model for that would be something like the Super Graphics, if anybody remembers that. I did a video on it, but basically NEC, they made the TurboGrafx 16/PC Engine. It's the same console, just look different in different countries. That system was a huge success in Japan, so much so that they decided to give it a sequel system called the Super Graphics, which was basically the PC Engine with updated hardware, and it had its own line of games. It was a like stupendous failure, to the point where they just kind of pretended like it didn't happen, and then like, oh yeah, no, that was just like a weird thing we did. Anyway, we're going to focus back on PC Engine again, because that's where their money was. So what I'm trying to say is, the only context in which the Switch somehow gets an extended lifespan beyond this is if Switch 2 comes out and everybody approaches it like that, where they're like, nah, I'm not interested, I want to stick with this thing. I don't see that happening, because that takes really unique circumstances, and this really doesn't apply. But aside from those scenarios, I think this is kind of the end. And so with that being the case, I do want to say this is the last time we're going to be doing an annual recap on this video, unless they shock us all and say that the Switch 2 actually doesn't launch for another full year, which I don't think is going to be the case. That said, I'm sure I'll do significant anniversary videos, or certainly now it finally opens the door to an 8th gen recap video, because everybody's been asking me for that for years, and the answer has always been the same. The Switch is an 8th gen console. Yes, it's an 8th gen console. It is not 9th gen hardware. And so as a result, I can't do it. So it's like the PS4, Xbox One, Wii U, and the Switch are all the same generation. You can't have 2 Nintendo consoles in the same generation, man. Yeah, you can. Neo Geo did it, Atari did it, or SNK more accurately. SNK did it twice with the Neo Geo CD and AES. Sega did it with the SG-1000 and the Sega Master System. Sort of did it again with the Sega CD, if you want to include that, and the Genesis. And then, yes and no. And Atari did it with the 2600 and the 5200. So, you can have a console company make 2 consoles in the same generation. And I always love when people are like, but I don't feel like it's actually an 8th gen console. It doesn't matter what you feel. Facts are facts. It's just reality. It does not satisfy the definition of a 9th gen console. Technologically, timing, market intentions, it's a cake. You bake those together, and that's how you define its generation. And by every stretch of the imagination, 8th gen console that just happened to survive freakishly long is really its story. But we'll talk about that in its own recap video whenever that happens. So, with that, there's not really a whole lot else to say on the Switch from the last year, Because like I said, it did everything it needed to do. And what I was saying last year is it had to prime up the Switch 2, aka don't cause harm, do no harm, and just kind of get people excited for it. And success, it did that. So this is it. This is kind of the swan song moment. This is that awkward phase where we kind of say goodbye to it, goodbye to the old friend, who is very old now. It's 8 years old. I mean, if you think about that, like very few consoles ever last 8 years, much less 8 years where they're dominant. And, you know, that said, it's not like they're not going to keep making content for it. It's just going to whittle down. I would bet you probably have like 2 or 3 more years at least of games still being in production to some extent. Maybe with some freak outlier in like 5 years from now. But again, that depends on, you know, how long Nintendo's willing to produce those carts. But yeah, this is the end of what we would call this administration, to stick with that little political comparison earlier. But yeah, no, it's been a good ride. I know it's a lot of people's favorite console, and I'm obviously, much like the rest of you, looking forward to seeing what the Switch 2 offers. I don't like the fact that it's... One thing that does concern me about that is the Switch 2, based on initial impressions, and this could obviously change because we just don't have enough information, but based on its initial impressions, to me, it reads more like the cell phone model. It feels like I have currently a Google Pixel 6, right? I used to have a Pixel 1. And to me, it feels like you're just upgrading your phone here. So you don't get super nostalgic for the older iteration of your phone like you would, say, an older console. Like, there's a distinct difference between, say, a Sega Saturn and a Sega Dreamcast. But there's not a whole distinct difference other than just generic updates for say, a Pixel 1 and a Pixel 6. Like, it's an improved piece of hardware, it does things better, but the interface is mostly the same, everything kind of carries over, it's just more reliable, and you don't get nostalgic for the older phone. It's kind of what I used to say, and still do actually, about the Xbox Series X feeling like a physical firmware update for the Xbox One X, because that's just the ecosystem. I don't like that direction, and unfortunately it seems like even Nintendo is going into it. What I guess I might pitch to you is that I don't think a lot of people are going to hold on to the Switch 1 that adopt the Switch 2, because it's going to just feel like an upgrade. And we've also conditioned now an entire generation to just treat updates that way. So it might be a situation where Switch 1s are definitely going to be worthless very soon. Like, we're talking like Japanese junk bins, like, you know, who knows how cheap they'll get. Like, over there right now, Wii U's are like $3 to $10, like, in the junk bins. Granted, they might need work, but the point is they're there. And that was an unsuccessful system. This one, which sold in a plethora, is just... Yeah, I can't imagine how cheap they're going to be, especially when we know Switch 2 offers backwards compatibility, at least to some extent. I guess what I would say is, if you somehow never got a Nintendo Switch 1 and are still watching this anyway, very soon, very soon, you're going to have the opportunity to get a Switch 1 for like pennies on the dollar. And if you hack that thing, you might really just have like your ultimate fun machine right there. That's a whole different idea, but still... I think, unfortunately, that's kind of the Switch's future, is once it is replaced, it is truly replaced. And I think any sense of nostalgia people will have for it eventually will be satisfied by its successor rather than the original hardware itself. Kind of the same way with the PS1. When people think of the PS1, they're typically thinking of the gameplay experiences and not the hardware itself, outside of the obvious boot up noise that everybody just gives everybody a nice warm glow, because most people replaced that hardware with PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 because it could play those games, and they just did it in bulk. That's why PS1 hardware to this day is still pretty cheap and pretty worthless. I don't know. We'll see. That is kind of the consequence of having like 150 million of these things out there, is that the demand does die, and then those things still are there. So yeah. Anyway, so that'll do it, I guess, for this particular video. Please, you guys, stay tuned to April 2nd. That is when Nintendo is going to be doing their announcement on Switch 2. That has more information, and we'll have more in there in the meantime. But we're just kind of at the end, guys. Like, it's that Green Day song, I hope you had the time of your life. Okay, I don't have any musical talent, but you get my point. Like, we're kind of at the end, so yeah. Anywho, if you guys will do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. I appreciate the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.